تحية وسلاما خالدين فيها حسنت مستقرا ومقاما قل ما يعبأ بكم ربي لولا دعاؤكم فقد كذبتم فسوف يكون لزاما صدق الله العلي العظيم.
Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. My condolences on this night. Just a few announcements before we call up our speakers. We do have a program after the speech for the color Amal in the main hall. We will be also having Amal for the next 5 days. Today we have a full Amal. Tomorrow will be like a half Amal, like Josh and Kabir, and then the rest is up to if you guys want to stick around. Inshallah, just we're having multiple programs for the next few evenings. Alhamdulillah, we're very blessed to have in our community and to have at our disposal Sheikh Salim Yusufali to be here with us on this special night. Please invite him up with your loudest of salawats. I'm going to ask the brothers to kindly move forward to make space for people who come in later. And for those who don't need chairs, I ask you guys to please come and sit in front of us and on the floor. Jazakallah. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.
Water or tea or something? Water, okay. Thank you.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين وخاتم النبيين وسيد المرسلين أبي القاسم محمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين ولعن الله الدائم على أعدائهم أجمعين من ليلتنا هذه إلى قيام يوم الدين. Respected brothers, sisters, on the occasion of the martyrdom of Imam Ali alayhi salam, I want to express my condolences first and foremost to our living Imam, Imam Sahib al-Zaman, Ajjalallahu Farajuhu al-Sharif, and to all of the believers, all the lovers of Imam Ali alayhi salam on this sad occasion. May Allah reward you for your participation in tonight's gathering. May Allah count you among the lovers and the followers of Amirul Mu'mineen Imam Ali alayhi salam. Tonight is one of the bigger occasions that we have here at Saba Islamic Center, and I'm sure when you look around you're going to see faces of people both that you recognize and also those that you might not recognize. And we have with us on this evening perhaps a number of people for whom this is the first time they're actually visiting Saba Center. So I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge everyone's presence, but especially those who are new to the center, to your center. Saba is the community's property. It belongs to the community, and you're very welcome here. We know that when you have a bigger environment sometimes it's easy to get grouped into your kind of comfort circle of people that you know. And then those who don't have that acquaintance, they feel like maybe they're not being welcomed. But please know that that's not the case. You're very welcome here on this evening. And for those of you who are regulars at Saba Center, I really encourage you during these nights to please reach out to those whom you're seeing for the first time. Or even if you've seen somebody after a long time, you haven't seen them and now you're seeing them, and just make them feel welcome. Don't give them, intense interrogation like where you've been, why weren't you here? Don't make them feel bad that way, but definitely let them know that they're appreciated and their presence here is welcomed. Inshallah, tonight we are beginning a series of 5 lectures, and tonight I want to take this lecture to introduce this series, and this will set the stage, inshallah, for the next 4 nights. The topic that I've chosen to speak about is the topic of the promises of God. And so what we're going to talk about, inshallah, is in particular some of the promises that Allah has made for us in the Quran. You all know that it is the month of Ramadan, it is the month of the Quran, and I'm sure that all of us are trying a little bit harder, inshallah, extra hard to read this great book, to understand it, to benefit from it in this month of its revelation. One of the themes that we see when we read the Quran is that often Allah makes promises. And sometimes if we just pass by them without focusing on that and asking some critical questions, we might be missing something really important. So my goal in talking about this topic is to, inshallah, shed some light on this concept of God promising things to those who do certain things and those who are a certain way. Why does He do it, and what is it that He's promising? And how can we apply that in our lives? But there's other reasons why I chose this particular topic that I'll talk about, inshallah, a little bit later in the lecture. I'm going to go ahead and get right into it tonight by quoting some of the ayat of the Quran about God's promises, and then inshallah we're going to go into that a little bit deeper. You can help me with the salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. In Surah Al-Mursalat, Allah Ta'ala says, Surah 77, verse 7, He says, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, Innama tu'aduna lawaqi'. What does that mean? It means that indeed what you have been promised is definitely going to happen. Now, think about this for a moment here. Who is it that's speaking? Right? It's God. And God is talking about promises. Now what that means, when you say a promise, you're talking about something that's not here right now, but something that will be at a future state. To whom does the present belong? To whom does the future belong? And everything in between, all of that is under the ownership of Allah. And Allah is saying that what you have been promised will definitely take place. That's number 1. Number 2, Allah Ta'ala says in Surah Ibrahim 14:47, فَلَا تَحْسَبَنَّ اللَّهُ مُخْلِفُ وَعَدِهِ رُسُلَهُ إِنَّ اللَّهَ عَزِيزٌ ذُو انْتِقَامٍ. Do not imagine that Allah will break His promise to His messengers. Allah's made promises to the messengers. Those messengers conveyed those promises to us. Don't ever imagine that God is going to break His promise. God is very mighty, and He is the one who is the avenger, meaning that God cannot be penetrated. He can't be stopped. When He wants to accomplish something, nobody can come and prevent Him from accomplishing what He wants to accomplish. Verse number 3, this is from Surah An-Nisa, verse 122. وَعَدَ اللَّهُ حَقًّا وَمَنْ أَصْدَقُ مِنَ اللَّهِ قِيلًا. Allah's promise is true, a true promise of Allah, and who is truer in His speech than Allah? So Allah is promising something, and then He's saying that who is truer than Allah when He says something. So when we take these ayat and many others, in fact, some of the scholars and the mufassirin of the Quran who have studied these ayat, they say that there's at least 35 verses in the Quran where Allah talks about the nature of His promises. He reminds us that there are promises. Not even talking about the specific promises, what He's promising, but just in general that there are these promises. At least 35 times in the Quran, Allah brings up this topic. Now, it's very interesting. If you ponder on this, and inshallah I'm inviting you to think and to reflect. On one hand, it can be very reassuring for us when Allah talks about His promises. Because it's nice to hear about promises of good things. But at the same time, and this is important, at the same time, we can also say that in a way, it is a reflection of the sad state of human affairs. That Allah, who is the greatest, Allah who is the most magnificent, Allah who is the one whom no one can challenge and rival, that He has to emphasize again and again that when I make a promise, I am not going to break my promise. After all, if we were to be in the company of somebody who we respect, somebody who we think is a fair person, somebody who we know is committed to the truth and doesn't lie, and that person were to make a promise, would we expect that that person now needs to tell us, oh, by the way, I just made a promise and you should know that the promise I made is going to be, I'm going to fulfill it. No, really, I'm telling you for sure, I'm telling you that I am going to fulfill this promise. What would we think? We'd be like, look I trust you, right? You're somebody I respect. I've never seen anything bad from you. You're an honest person. You don't need to come and reassure me again and again that when you're making a promise to me that you're not going to break that promise. But Allah Ta'ala does that again and again. Why is that? Right? Maybe there's somebody, you know how some people, they have a psychological condition, they actually have a tendency to lie. Right? So sometimes they'll go and they'll be like, no, I'm telling you, I'm telling you honestly. Like I'm 100% honest. You know, I'll be honest with you. Like they'll repeat it again. I'll be honest with you, this, right? And then if they say it enough, then you start wondering like, well, why does this person have to keep on saying, I'll be honest with you? But in the case of Allah Ta'ala, وَمَنْ أَصْدَقُ مِنَ اللَّهِ قِيلًا, who is it that's more truthful when they say a statement than Allah? What does that show us? It shows us something about the sorry state of the human condition. Now this is very interesting. Brothers and sisters, if we ask ourselves that what is the tendency of human beings when it comes to the promise of another human being versus the promise of Allah, which one typically for a human being has more of a greater impact? Allama Tabatabai in his book Risalatul Wilaya, which has been translated into English, he gives some beautiful examples. He gives 3 examples. He says, first of all, he says, imagine that you're saying your prayers and you're saying a prayer where you're being distracted. Your attention is being like scattered, you're this way and that way. Okay, just ask yourself for a moment that if you were in the presence, you weren't praying, right? But you were in the presence of somebody very revered, like a king or a head of a state. So now you're in the presence of somebody, you know that they're looking at you, right? What sort of feeling are you going to have in your heart, right? Well, you're going to be like, okay, well, I'm in the presence of somebody who's like, pretty important, right? So I got to keep my etiquette, I got to do things in a certain way. Then he says that, look at your condition in prayer. Here you are standing in front of somebody who is closer to you than your very life vein. أَقْرَبُ إِلَيْكَ مِنْ حَبْلِ الْوَرِيدِ, meaning the very life that you have. وَاللَّهُ يَحُولُ بَيْنَ الْمَرْءِ وَقَلْبِ, between closer than your heart. Allah is closer to you than that. And we know that when we stand in prayer, Allah is giving His special attention to us. So why is it that when we're in prayer, we don't have this understanding that we're in the presence of Allah. There's a beautiful tradition that we have in books of hadith. The gist of it is this, that is a hadith al-Qudsi. Allah says that when my servant comes and stands in front of me in prayer, I turn to him or her. I give my attention to him or her. And I am looking at them. And then if they turn away from me, not that they turn their body away from me, but they turn their attention away from me, I continue to look at them. And I continue to regard them with special regard. And if they do that a second time, I continue to regard them and give them special attention. But if they do it a third time, then I look away. 3 times. Right? This is a hadith al-Qudsi. That's one example. Allah Ta'ala gives another example. He says that how many times in our lives do we depend and rely upon another human being for something? But yet, when it comes to relying upon Allah, we're often hesitant to do so. Right? We rely on a fallible human being. I'll give you an example. Right? There's these companies that have figured out how to do self-driving cars. Okay, Waymo. How many of you have been in a Waymo? Anybody here? Okay, we have one person. Okay, I bet you if I ask this question next year, maybe half of you are going to raise your hands, right? Okay? Self-driving cars. All right, how many of you would be willing to go into a self-driving car? I bet you a lot of the young people will be like, yeah, of course, that'd be cool, right? I can take Instagram pictures. That's it, I'd be this brother here probably, he has something to tell us, right? Now think about it, right? What are you relying on when you go into this self-driving car? How much of it is dependent on human beings who are fallible, right? But we're like, you know what? I think that, they probably did a pretty good job. They're related to Google, right? People at Google kind of know what they're doing, right? I've been using their stuff for 10 years or 15 years, whatever like that, right? So I have pretty good confidence that, I can rely on these guys to pretty much get me to where I want to get to without getting an accident, right? Now, that versus relying on Allah, right? A difficult situation comes up in my life, right? I get so tense. And I get so worried. I'm like, how am I going to get through this thing? I'm alone. I don't know what to do. And Allah is saying that, Wallahu ma'akum aina ma kuntum. Okay, that's example number 2. Then he gives another example. He says that if we were to, he makes a statement, it's very interesting. He says that if we were to have 1/1000th of the trust that we have on the word of other people when it comes to Allah, then when it comes to the hereafter and Allah's promises, we would behave in a different way. Right? Here's Allah who's promising us that if you commit yourself to this path, you will have whatever
So we need these reminders. That's why Allah in the Quran puts so much emphasis telling us again and again that when I'm telling you that I'm promising you this, please listen. Trust me. I am asdaqu qila. I'm the one who speaks nothing but the truth. I am the one, la yukhlifu Allahu al-mi'ad. Allah never, ever breaks His promises. Since Allah is. Okay, now, brothers and sisters, with that introduction, I want to give an example from the Quran, which gives us a beautiful contrast of the promises of Allah versus the false promises that others can give you. And it's an amazing story from the Quran that we need to think about and reflect upon. It's a story of Pharaoh and Musa. Right? This story appears so many times in the Quran. And each time it comes up, yes, we need to understand the historical incident, but we also want to understand why Allah Ta'ala is giving us this story and how it applies in our current situation. Okay, so in this particular narration of the story, it's from Surah Al-Shu'ara, Surah number 26. Allah describes the situation.
there's a threat to the kingdom, right? We have this rebel prophet who's claiming prophethood, he's claiming a connection to God, and he's challenging the authority of Pharaoh. So Pharaoh takes advice, and they tell him that the way to combat this man, definitely he's doing sorcery. The way to combat him is to go and find the most powerful sorcerers that you can possibly find in the land, and gather them together, and together they'll be able to defeat Nabi Musa. Okay? Now, when Allah describes the events, it's very interesting. He says that when these sorcerers, what happened is that Pharaoh's men, they went all around the country, and they started to search for the best magicians, the ones who had the most skill, the best sleight of hand. And when they came to Pharaoh, they had one thing to say. They said, قالوا لفرعون أئن لنا لأجرا إن كنا نحن الغالبين. Pharaoh, is it the case that we're going to be given a great reward if we're the ones who are going to be victorious here? What are they saying? They're saying that Pharaoh, we've come all the way from our different towns, right? Because we know this is something which is really important for you to be victorious in this thing right here. Tell us something. What's in it for us? Right? And they kind of already are prompting Pharaoh. The Arabic there, the ajran, meaning that it's something which is very great. Oh, you guys have this. Thank you very much. Another salawat, please. So they want to know what Pharaoh is going to promise them. And so Pharaoh, what does he say, right? He needs these magicians to do what they're going to do. So he says, no, yes, right? You're going to have that great reward you're looking for. But not only that, what does he say? He says, وَإِنَّكُمْ إِذًا لَمِنَ الْمُقَرَّبِينَ. You are going to be among those who have qurb. You have proximity to me. You know how we say qurbatan ilallah in our prayers, right? Pharaoh says that if you do this for me, you're going to have qurbatan ila Pharaoh. Right? You get two things. You get your reward, your thawab, right? And you get your qurbatan ila Pharaoh. So these magicians, right, when they get that offer from Pharaoh, who's Pharaoh? Pharaoh for them is the Lord of the land. Right? We know in the Quran that Pharaoh presented himself as that. He said what? He said, Ana Rabbukum al-A'la. If you want to know who I am your highest Lord. Right? In another ayah he says that I don't know of any ilah, I don't know of any God save me. I'm the one who's the God in town, right? Nobody else is God. I'm God. Right? So we got both. We got the material reward and we get our spiritual reward. We're gonna have that proximity to Pharaoh. Right? And then they're charged up. They tell Musa, they say, قَالَ لَهُمْ مُوسَى أَلْقُوا مَا أَنْتُمْ. Sorry, Musa tells them, go and cast what you ever want to cast. Do your magic, whatever you want to do. And they say, فَأَلْقُوا حِبَالَهُمْ وَعِصِيَّهُمْ وَقَالُوا بِعِزَّةِ فِرْعَوْنَ إِنَّا لَنَحْنُ الْغَالِبُونَ. So what do? They throw down their ropes. They throw down their staffs. And they throw it down with what intention? With the intention of bi'izzati Fir'aun. I think you guys are getting where I'm coming from here, right? They have their thawab in mind. What is their thawab? Right? It's that reward that they're going to get from Fir'aun. They have the qurba as well. They have qurbatan ila Fir'aun. Right? And then now they're doing their version of bismi. Right? You know how we say bismillah? What is their bismi? Their bismi is bismi Fir'aun. Right? With the might of Pharaoh, who's the Lord, the Most High, we are going to be the ones who are victorious. Brothers and sisters, whose promise are they depending upon? It's the promise of a fallible human being, right? One who has so many flaws, one who is limited in so many dimensions. And what soon happens is that they realize their mistake. فَأَلْقَى مُوسَى عَصَاهُ فَإِذَا هِيَ تَلْقَفُ مَا يَأْفِكُونَ. Musa cast down his staff, and it swallows everything that they had cast down. It destroys it. Now this is a lesson for us. It's not just that Musa's serpent is swallowing their magic. It's swallowing their false understandings of reward and of qurba and of the bismi as well. And all of that, they are realizing it's being destroyed right in front of their eyes. And so what happens? فَأُلْقِيَ السَّحَرَةُ سَاجِدِينَ. The sorcerers fall down prostrate. Right? There's a discussion among the Mufassirin. What made them go down into sajda? Why is it that these people who had come all the way, they had been given such great promises, suddenly they're doing sajda to Allah? Right? And one of the discussions is that, okay, well, is this something that Allah forces them? And then Mufassirin said that, this is the truth when it sinks down, it's like a mountain that hits you. And so they are now doing sajda on the ground. And then, قَالُوا آمَنَّا بِرَبِّ الْعَالَمِينَ. We've changed now. Right? We've reoriented ourselves. We're not looking for that worldly reward and that false promise of Pharaoh. We don't care about being close to Pharaoh anymore. That idea of doing things by the might of Pharaoh, that was a fallacy. Now we have the Lord who's Rabb al-Alameen. That's the one that we're depending on. It's His promises that we are going to refer to going forward. And then He's the Lord of Musa and Pharaoh. So you see here that in this story, Allah Ta'ala is giving this example of two promises. You can go with the promise of the people, those short-lived sort of things that we might aspire for, or you can go with the promise of Allah, right? Which is unbreakable, which is most definitely going to occur. Please say salawat ala Now, brothers and sisters, you've been very patient. I want to touch on just a couple more things, and inshallah we're going to go to the musibah. Until now, we've talked about the concept of a promise in the Quran. I gave you some ayahs where Allah is emphasizing how important His promises are. We talked about how that's an indication of the sad state of human beings. We gave the story of the magicians of Pharaoh. Now I want to ask this question here, which is that why is it that sometimes we feel a little bit jaded when it comes to promises that are given to us? There was a time when the Muslims, they would be getting the ayat of the Quran that were being revealed to them. And when they would hear a promise of Allah, at least for some of them, maybe not all of them, at least for some of them, that would be sufficient for them. And they would be so encouraged, they would be so motivated to go and do whatever they had to do, right? They would go and move mountains, right? They did miracles because of those promises of Allah. But sometimes, right, if we ask ourselves and we read about, for example, the promises of Jannah and the promises of, rivers beneath which, gardens beneath which rivers flow, and Allah's forgiveness and whatnot, sometimes we may feel a little bit like, okay, but not too intrigued. Why? Why isn't that the case? Why is it that sometimes we don't feel the weight of the promise being given? And so I'm going to explore that, inshallah, not just but one reason I want to put forth tonight is that sometimes it has to do with the home that we were raised in. Very important. It's narrated in our books of Hadith, which is from our Prophet, please. So in this hadith, he says that إِذَا وَعَدْتُمُ الصِّبْيَانَ, if you give a promise to your child, then definitely fulfill that promise. Because why should you fulfill the promise? What is the Prophet concerned about? Is he concerned about your preserving your relationship with your child in the future? Of course, that's important. If your child feels like their parents are liars, that's devastating. Right? So obviously that's important. Okay? This is one of those hadith, brothers and sisters, which goes at a deeper level. And it talks about something which is so important, because what is a home supposed to be about? And what is the definition of a home? Why does the Prophet want parents not to say lies to their children? Because he says, فَإِنَّهُمْ يَرَوْنَ أَنَّكُمْ وَالَّذِينَ تُرْزَقُونَهُمْ أَنَّ اللَّهَ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ لَيْسَ فإنهم يرون أنكم الذين ترزقون. Why? Because they see you being the source of the provision of Allah reaching them. And how is it that children learn about how Allah keeps His promises? What is it that teaches them that security and that safety and that comfort, knowing that there's someone who's looking over them, someone they can rely on? Well, the first point of contact they have is their parents. So if the parents are going to be unstable, if the parents are going to be breaking promises, then what are the children going to learn about the promises of Allah? It's going to be hard for them to reconcile that. They need that type of comforting environment where they see their parents fulfilling the promises. Now you can start at that, right? And that's important because sometimes parents, they say, oh, it's just a kid, right? I can just say whatever I want. When the kids are younger, they're like, oh, make up something. Yeah, oh, the kid's like, oh, can you take me to, I don't know, America? Yeah, we'll go tomorrow. And we think that, okay, well, they'll forget by tomorrow, right? Now, kids won't forget by every single thing goes out. But beyond that, brothers and sisters, it's the attitude that we take towards this responsibility. It starts with keeping promises, but it goes to a different level, which is that when you understand that in general, when somebody is given the responsibility with a family member, that itself is a type of promise that they are committing to keep. Then it changes the nature of our relationships. When Allah Ta'ala speaks about marriage in the Quran, when He speaks about marriage, He uses the terminology mithaqan ghaliza. Now, mithaq in Arabic, it means an agreement which is a firm agreement. Allah, when He's describing marriage, He doesn't talk about marriage just being a firm agreement. He says it's a firm agreement that is extra firm. It's something which is a very, very heavy and important commitment that you're making. And now, somebody knows that marriage is a commitment that you know what? I made a promise when I got married to Allah that I'm going to treat this person in a certain way. That's my responsibility. But sometimes we don't do what we have to do. We take it lightly. We forget about it. We get into ourselves. We're not willing to open up our hearts. We're not willing to compromise, forgive. And then what happens is that our home becomes a home where not only our promises not kept, but in general, that level of trust is not there. And so we grow up in an environment where we're like, promises, you know what, I've seen that. I've been there, and too many times I've wanted something to be a certain way, but it's not that way, because people don't keep their end of the bargain. So maybe that's one of the reasons why. And so when we're coming to the majalis, right, we want to be thinking about this, that how do I take this and actually apply it in my life? Right? So it starts with making sure that we don't make promises lightly, but it also goes to a general sense that I need to be somebody who's faithful to my promises, my agreements, my covenants, my relationships, my responsibilities to my children, to my parents, to my siblings, and to my spouse, which is Allah. Brothers and sisters, all of this, we want to connect back to the one who we are remembering tonight. One of the things about Imam Ali, if you go and study his life, is that among all the companions, all those who were present at the time of our Prophet, the one who had the most certain faith in the promises of Allah was Imam Ali. We have ahadith, multiple ahadith, where other companions who are fair, they themselves, they say that whenever any ayah in the Quran is revealed where Allah talks to the believers and He says, Ya ayyuhal ladina amanu, the one who is sayyiduhum, the one who is the chief of all of them, is Ali. No one else has that level of iman that Imam Ali has. No one else could have said, لو كشف الغطاء that if the curtains were to be lifted, my certainty and my belief will not increase even a bit. Why? Because there's no curtain for me. I see it the way it is. When that person comes up to him and says that you worship a Lord that you can't see, he says that I would never worship a Lord that I can't see. But I see him with reality of faith in my heart. That faith, brothers and sisters, is faith in the promises of Allah. Imam Ali was one of those who would frequently remind others that Allah's promise will always be true. That's why we see on this occasion of the darba, the striking of Imam Ali that this too is one of those occasions in which Imam Ali is going to mention the promise of Allah. So I want to go through that story for tonight, and inshallah we're going to take this opportunity to open up our hearts and try to emotionally connect to the events that took place. This is our opportunity here to bring some softness to our hearts in preparation for the amal that we're going to perform tonight. But I can't do that before mentioning the real reason why I brought this topic of the promises of Allah, and that has to do with the situation in Palestine. When we look at what's going on there, I think the topic of Allah's promises is so relevant from multiple angles. Number one, because if we don't have faith in the promises of Allah, I don't understand how we can even continue to function normally. With all the horrific events that have been taking place since October 7th and before October 7th and are happening on a daily basis, I don't know how it can happen. The only thing, if we're actually human beings, if we actually believe that we're in one ummah and that we have to be concerned about the affairs of our brothers and sisters, I don't know how we could function if it were not our faith in Allah's promises. And sometimes that faith gets into a little bit of a recharge. And so that's why I chose this topic of the promises of Allah, because it's going to be very, very important for us to keep that faith charged at a high level. And the second reason, brothers and sisters, is something that you're all aware of, inshallah. It's that one of the things that's happening is that through this current event that's unfolding in front of us, that's being broadcast to us, live streamed to us, we are being reminded about the power of faith in the promises of Allah. When we see people who are literally sitting on the rubble of their home with their family members crushed by these buildings that fell upon them, and they have a smile on their face. How can you explain that? Except by talking about the promises of Allah. I want to tell you about the story of Shihab. Shihab is a 19-year-old man. I think that perhaps on a night like this, he might be crying. Why would he be crying? Because Shihab, just some weeks ago, he was with his mother, who had spent some time in the refugee camp because she knew that it was a dangerous situation. She went to spend time with her family just for a night. And that was the night that the Israeli army, with US supplied weapons, decided to go and bomb that area of civilians. And when they hear the bombs, the family wakes up and they quickly go to the shelter, but the mother has to pause. Why is she pausing? Because she doesn't want to go outside of the home without her chador. She doesn't want to go outside of the home without covering herself. And those precious moments that she takes to put that chador on her head is that moment where they send a second round of bombing, and she is crushed by the furniture in her own home. And the picture is there of this 19-year-old who's clinging to the shrouded corpse of his mother for more than an hour, not willing to let it go, unable to cope with what's taking place. So, brothers and sisters, it's important for us to be present with the times. But Ramadan is about connecting with reality. It's about being able to realize the blessings that we have and the blessings that others don't have, and about learning about how we ought to be. So with that, brothers and sisters, we come to the story of Awwal Mu'min. The first of those who were treated unjustly. Who says Salah? صلى الله عليك يا أمير المؤمنين صلى الله عليك يا علي بن أبي طالب. We're told that one time there was a battle of Uhud where so many of the valiant soldiers of Islam were martyred. Imam Ali alayhi salam goes to Rasulullah. He had fought so bravely, but he had escaped harm. He asked Rasulullah, Ya Rasulullah, Hamza fulfilled his covenant and he became a shaheed. The others became shaheed. Ya Rasulullah, will I too become a shaheed? Will I have that honor of giving my life in the way of Allah? The Prophet tells him, Ya Ali, you too will have your time when you will become a shaheed. Some years later on, Imam Ali alayhi salam goes to Rasulullah. He asks him, Ya Rasulullah, tell me, I know there will be a trial for the Muslims that will come after you have left this world. Tell me, is the promise that you gave me, will it still come true? Rasulullah tells him, Ya Ali, what has been promised to you will happen. You too will become a shaheed. But tell me, what will your condition be at that time? Will you have the patience necessary to have a noble shahada? Giving one's life, it can be easy. What's important is the struggle that takes place before then. What a struggle Imam Ali alayhi salam had to go through. Imam Ali alayhi salam tells him, Ya Rasulullah, when it comes to giving my life for Allah's sake, that's not an occasion which is bitter, where I have to have sabr and patience. That is occasion of bushra, occasion of shukr, an occasion of thankfulness. That's good news. Rasulullah tells him, O Ali, this ummah will one day come to you and you will be martyred. Imam Ali alayhi salam is longing for this day. He knows that it will be in this Ramadan. His family is worried about him. He is eating very little. He is frequently mentioning the meeting with his Lord, that promise that Rasulullah gave him. He goes to the home of Kulthum. She's so worried for her father. Oh, my father, why are you eating so little? He tells her, oh, my dear daughter, when I meet my Lord, I wish to meet him with a stomach that's not full. Because those who fill themselves will wait the longest on the day of judgment. Imam Ali alayhi salam on this night, he is looking at the sky. He is waiting for the time when that moment will arrive. He makes his way to the masjid. His family members try to tell him, let us accompany you. Imam Hassan is worried. Imam Hussein is worried. Sayyidah Zainab is worried about their father. He tells them, don't worry, this is the promise of Allah. He makes his way to the masjid. He begins to do his salah. Imam Ali alayhi salam is at home, in the home of Allah. He's doing what he loves. He's supplicating to Allah. He is saying that prayer. I wonder, what is it that he was praying for? What sort of munajat would have come to his lips on this night of Qadr? The time for Fajr enters. Imam Ali alayhi salam is the mu'adhin. He cries out the adhan, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. The people start to become awake, they start to gather in the masjid. Imam Ali alayhi salam continues to pray. Ibn Muljim was waiting for this moment. The poisoned sword is ready. When Imam Ali alayhi salam raises his head from sujood, Ibn Muljim is waiting to pounce on him. He raises the blade to the head of Ali. He strikes. This is a head. How many hours, how many days did it spend in sajda to Allah? This is the head that never bowed to any idol. But this is the head that Ibn Muljim wants to strike. He strikes Imam Ali alayhi salam. Immediately Imam Ali alayhi salam cries out, Fustu wa Rabbil Kaaba. I have indeed achieved the success by the Lord of the Kaaba. They say that in the city a voice is heard. Whose voice is this? This is the voice of the angel Jibreel. This is an occasion too great to be limited to people. Even the heavens are involved in mourning what has happened. What is the crier saying that everyone can hear? تهدمت والله أركان الهدى. By Allah, the very pillar of guidance has collapsed. Imam Ali alayhi salam is the very pillar of guidance. If somebody wants to be guided, they cannot be guided without Imam Ali alayhi salam. That firm rope of Allah has been cut off. قتل ابن عم المصطفى. The cousin of the Mustafa has been killed. The chosen successor has been killed. قتله أشقى الأشقياء. The most wretched of all people have killed Ali. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. We ask Allah Ta'ala to accept this message from us. We ask Him to make us among the lovers of Imam Ali alayhi salam. We ask Him to make us among those who are following Imam Ali alayhi salam. We ask Allah Ta'ala to preserve the iman that we have, that iman which we learned from the likes of Imam Ali alayhi salam and his family. We ask Allah Ta'ala on this night to help those who are oppressed, to give the victory that is promised to those who are oppressed in the earth. We ask Allah Ta'ala to help those who are suffering so much in Gaza, in Palestine, in Syria, in Lebanon, in Yemen, and all the other places in this world. We ask Allah Ta'ala to hasten the appearance of the Imam of our time. With the barakah of Allah Ta'ala Muhammad wa alihi wa sallam.